There are some fears that feel like they're just baked into our DNA. And today, we're digging into one of the big ones, the absolute terror of being buried alive. It's a fear that has haunted humanity for centuries, and man, it has led to some bizarre inventions, some truly incredible stories of survival, and even some, well, very strange career choices.
So let's just start with a question. Really think about it. If you had to picture the absolute worst way to go, what comes to mind? For a whole lot of people, it's that. The pitch black, suffocating panic of being trapped in a coffin 6 feet underground while you're still very, very much alive.
Yeah, this fear is so common, it actually has a clinical name, topophobia. Now, today, with modern medicine, the idea of a premature burial feels pretty unwarranted, right? It's almost impossible. But for centuries, oh, it wasn't unwarranted at all. It was a terrifyingly real possibility.
All right, so here's where we're headed. First, we'll get into that historical obsession with being buried alive. Then, we'll jump to a modern story of being trapped deep in the earth. After that, things get weird when we look at people who choose to be buried. And finally, we'll untangle one of history's most famous cases and separate the facts from the fiction.
Okay, first up, let's travel back in time, way back, before heart monitors, before EEGs, to a time when telling the difference between someone in a deep coma and someone who was actually dead was, tricky, to say the least. And that uncertainty, it created the perfect storm for a full-blown panic.
And you can see on this timeline just how big this got. The 18th and 19th centuries were basically the golden age of tapophobia. This wasn't just a quiet little worry people had, no, it became an entire industry. People were patenting safety coffins left and right. It all peaked in 1898 when a real-life count actually tested his fancy high-tech coffin with a live volunteer just to prove it would work. Unbelievable.
And these weren't just simple boxes with a bell on a string. The ingenuity was incredible. People were designing coffins with bells, flags, air pipes leading to the surface. Some even had ladders inside or little glass windows so a guard could peek in to check for, signs of life. It just goes to show how deeply and seriously people took this threat. And you know what? Their fears were totally justified. Take the mind-blowing story of Essie Dunbar. In 1915, she had an epileptic seizure, was pronounced dead, and was buried. But her sister was late to the funeral and begged to have one last look. So they dug up the coffin, opened the lid, and Essie sat right up and smiled at everybody. She went on to live for another 47 years. Can you imagine?
But not every story ended so happily. For every miracle like Essie, there was a tragedy. A few decades earlier, a woman named Philomèle Jonatre was pronounced dead from cholera and buried just 16 hours later. A gravedigger actually heard her knocking from inside the coffin and managed to dig her up. She was alive, but just barely. Heartbreakingly, she died the very next day, a rescue that came just a little too late.
Now let's fast forward to our time, to a story that absolutely gripped the entire planet. This isn't about being mistaken for dead, but about being very much alive while buried under tons and tons of rock.
We start with the number, 33. That's how many miners were instantly trapped deep inside the San Jose mine in Chile. And the depth they were at is just staggering, 2,300 feet down. That's nearly half a mile straight into the earth. And what was trapping them? A single slab of rock. It weighed 700,000 tons. To put that in perspective, that's a chunk of mountain as tall as a 45-story building that just collapsed and sealed their only way out. Their exit wasn't just blocked, it was gone.
And the timeline of their ordeal is just immense. From the moment of the collapse, it took 17 days. 17 days of total silence from below, with the world having no idea if they were alive or dead before a drill finally broke through. And from that moment, it still took an agonizing 69 days before the first man was finally brought back to the surface. This was the moment everything changed. After those 17 days of darkness and near starvation, a tiny drill bit finally punched through to their little safe room. And when the rescuers pulled it back up, this simple, powerful message was attached to it. It told the entire world they had survived the impossible. We are well in the refuge, the 33.
So we've covered being buried by mistake and by accident, but what about people who choose to be buried alive, on purpose? Yeah,
This is where our story takes a hard left turn into the absolutely bizarre world of so-called burial artists, people who let themselves be entombed for fame, for glory, or to pull off the ultimate escape act.
And what's fascinating is why they did it. You have two totally different motivations here. On one side, you've got a guy like Mick Meaney. He was an Irish laborer who just wanted to be somebody, to be remembered. For him, it was all about endurance, staying buried longer than anyone else. Then on the other side, you have an escape artist like Anthony Britton, who was trying to be the next Houdini. His goal wasn't to stay in, but to get out. A stunt that, by the way, almost killed him when he passed out and had to be frantically dug up by his crew.
Mick Meaney, though, he actually pulled it off. Back in 1968, he was buried in a coffin under a pile of dirt in London and just stayed there. For 61 days, he set a new world record. Of course, his coffin wasn't just an empty box. It had pipes for air and food and even a telephone so he could chat with the press.
But for Meaney, this wasn't just some wacky publicity stunt. It went much deeper. His daughter, Mary, later explained that for an ordinary working guy, this extreme act was his way of making a mark on the world, a way to finally feel like, I'm somebody.
All right, for our last stop, let's look at a case that has become a true legend. It's a story where the line between what really happened and what people think happened has gotten incredibly blurry over the years.
Okay, so the legend of Angelo Hayes is pretty famous. Young guy crashes his motorcycle in 1937, gets declared dead, buried, and then dug up 2 days later, alive. It's a great story, but the reality, while still incredible, is a little different. Hayes was in such a deep coma after his crash that his body's need for oxygen dropped dramatically. That's how he survived. An insurance company did have his body exhumed and he was found to be warm, but the best evidence we have says this all happened before he was ever actually buried. Still, he fooled the doctors completely. And then, in a truly wild twist, he became a huge celebrity in France and invented his own luxury security coffin with a fridge, a toilet, a whole library, and he took it on tour.
Which really brings us to a final thought, doesn't it? Today, modern medicine has pretty much made premature burial a thing of the past. It's next to impossible. But has all that technology really conquered this deep, primal fear we have? Or has it just eliminated the chance of it happening, leaving the horror itself to live on, deep down in our collective imagination?